You know what? I really miss my granddad. He was fantastic in so many ways. Really my father figure growing up. And one of the things I miss most about him is his memory. He loved to memorize. He could quote all sorts of ancient texts. He loved poetry. I'm not sure that I hear folks my age quoting poetry quite as much anymore, or if at all. He would quote the Raven almost every family event. And I was always blown away by that. And he installed that within me to memorize. And a lot of times it's not large portions of text. It could be just recall of some good, helpful things like Hafiz, who said, "Troubled? Then come with me, for I am not." Or Richard Rohr, who said the opposite of faith is not doubt, it's control. Well, I'm a controlling person, so that's the reason I memorized that, so that I'd have more faith. Well, we're continuing this series of Christ-conscious practices. What are the things that he actually practiced? What did he live out? If we're going to enter this Christ consciousness, if we're going to live in love, certainly we should follow the example of the one who really gave us the pathway forward in a very visible way, in a very conscious way. Hi, my name is Paul Evans. I'm a student of Scripture and spirituality, and I love doing series like this simply because it challenges me. It's challenging me to look at some of these texts a little bit deeper and to look at the walk of the greats a lot deeper. And when we're thinking about Christ, and when quick sidebar, make sure you subscribe and like this channel. Comment on this if there's any questions. Go to 1010lifeletter.com and sign up for the newsletter. I'm so out of touch with what you're supposed to do correctly on these things and trying to make sure you're found. That's really not even in my heart or intention. I'm just hoping that if this is a blessing to someone, hey, that's enough for me. Anyway, so when it comes to the Christ, he was Jewish. And so his background would have been memorizing Jewish texts. Now, he's called a rabbi. That may have been more honorary than traditionally trained. But regardless, he most likely had the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, most likely had those memorized. Also, probably large chunks of the Psalms, of Proverbs, of the other wisdom text. Most likely a lot of that was committed to memory so that could be drawn upon not only for personal direction, but also, as we see a lot in the Gospels, him debating people. A lot of the Psalms and Proverbs don't show up with specific quotes, but they show up in the parables. And so we're just going to look at a handful of ways that the Christ showed that he had a lot of text memorized. So number one, we've already mentioned the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. These would have been foundational text. Passages like Deuteronomy, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one." We know that he quoted that, and we're going to have just a little section at the end of this video of things that he quoted. Secondly, the Psalms, a core part of Jewish wisdom and devotion. So many of his teachings echoed the Psalms. For example, he quotes Psalm 22 during his crucifixion. My God, why have you forsaken me?" He also, Psalm 110:1 is quoted by Jesus in the Gospels. Number 3, the prophetic books. He often quoted the major and minor prophets such as Isaiah, as Jeremiah, and Micah. So these things were committed to memory. He wasn't traveling around with a bunch of scrolls. There wasn't a big book that he traveled with. You know, if he entered a synagogue, a scroll would be pulled that he might read from. You know, even if he had it memorized, he was reading from it. But if he didn't have it memorized, he wasn't traveling around with a bunch of scrolls. He didn't turn to Peter or Andrew or John and say, "Hey guys, hit me up with scroll 37. That just didn't happen. In this day, you had to memorize. In fact, it was a big part of the culture that if you went to synagogue, you were listening Not like today, I'm just trying to hear a message and hopefully something connects. They were there to memorize. I probably have this incorrect, so go and look this up. But I believe that in synagogue, the entire what we would label Old Testament text was read out loud over a period of 5 years and would be repeated. I believe that the Torah was read either every year or every 2 years. So this is how the attender, because they didn't have scrolls at home, would learn these texts. And so the Christ would do that, he'd be part of that training. It also would have training outside of that the rabbinical training that he would have been part of. So number 3 was the prophetic books. Number 4, Deuteronomy. This is especially significant because Jesus directly quotes it during the temptation in the wilderness. No, this is Matthew chapter 4 that we're going to hit in a week for sure. But having this memorized allowed him, is what's called the temptation or the challenges, for him to be able to come back with his foundation, which I think is important because we live in a world today where a new idea pops up and people get on it like crazy. The latest diet idea, everybody goes nuts. One of the most obvious marketing tactics today is when you see a headline that says everything you learned about X is wrong. Everything you learned about protein quotients is wrong. Everything you learned about sugar is wrong. That's coming at some point. Everything you learned about exercise is wrong. Well, people just go down whatever path. They just hear something, they believe it, they go down that path automatically. Same is true spiritually. And it's not that we aren't supposed to change and we're not on a journey. We are. But we should have some things committed to memory in our faith practices and our philosophies so that they form somewhat of a foundation so that when the new idea, the trendy thing comes along, not that we're going to say that it's wrong and we're going to judge it. What we're going to do instead is we're going to consider it. We're going to contemplate. We're not going to casually accept, and we're not just going to jump on the bandwagon. Because if you've been alive for decades, you've seen things come and go like crazy. And so Deuteronomy was a big text for him because it provided a lot of support. Number 5, the book of Proverbs. Another wisdom book that most likely he had memorized. And Proverbs is where a lot of the parable teachings really come from. That a lot of the concepts, a lot of the ideas in the parables came from the Proverbs. Number 6 is the law. Jesus frequently referenced the 10 Commandments, as well as aspects of the Jewish law, including moral and ceremonial laws. So think about that. You don't see him going around teaching the 10 Commandments. What he tends to do is to utilize them. Like when the woman caught in adultery is brought to Jesus and they're saying the law says that she should be stoned. He doesn't go, oh, what law are you talking about? What do you mean? He knew the law, right? That was committed to memory. The difference was he also knew the motive of the law. Not simply, we're going to keep this law and here's the law, here's the rule. Oh, caught, stone. Nope. He says, whoever hears without sin, you start. You go first. Because he knew the heart of the law. And then he said to the lady, where are your accusers? Nowhere, Lord. Neither do I accuse you. You have to know the law in order to apply the law in the correct way. That's why memorization is good. Not so we become rigid, but so when someone comes to us with something new or with a judgment, we've got the foundation in order to provide a different angle and shine the light in a different way. The book of Daniel, Jesus indirectly references Daniel in his teachings about the Son of Man. Maybe in the future at some point we'll get into that. It's very interesting, the concept of the Son of Man and what that really means. But that obviously he has a great awareness about. Number 8 is the wisdom literature, book of Ecclesiastes, which talks about the meaning of life and the plan of the divine. The Gospel of Matthew actually shows a very similar concepts. And so he is familiar with that. So key scriptures that he quoted in his ministry: Deuteronomy 6:5, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. We often call those the greatest commandments. And don't let the word commandment freak you out if that's not your terminology. I find that because people often have traumatic experiences or bad memories from religious organizations that pounded commandments and obedience into them in a very unloving way. They hear the word command. Think about lifestyle. Hey, this is what's going to make your life better. In fact, it says in the book of Deuteronomies, I made it plural, that these commands, what's the Lord require of you? But 2, X, Y, and Z, for your own good, for your greatest good. So the commands are not, I'm going to catch you. The commands are to set us free. So that's Deuteronomy. He mentions that in Matthew 22:37, Mark 12:30. Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself. This is the heart of his ethical and value-based teaching. Matthew 22:39, Mark 12:31. Isaiah 61:1 and 2, he quotes, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He reads this in a synagogue to announce his ministry in Luke 4:18 and 19. He quotes Psalm 82:6. I love this one. You are God's. Jesus uses this verse in John 10:34 to defend himself and his divinity. We can use that to defend ourselves and our divinity. You are God's. Psalm 82:6. And so Jesus' spiritual practice of memorization served him throughout his ministry. Him personally. It strengthened him personally, and it gave him a reference point because most of his crowd that he spoke to had large chunks of this memorized. It became common ground, became a launching point for him to move forward. And that is a great reason to memorize, not for differentiation, not for separation, not for judgment, not for correction, but for common ground. This is our beginning point. And now let's examine it and let's shine the light on different aspects. What's that mean to you? How does that challenge you? How do you see that? How do you interpret that? It's a great opening. Sometimes people use scripture as a closing. Let's shut the door on that instead of this is an opportunity to open. But we can't use it very well if we don't have things memorized. Psalm 110:11 says, how does a young person keep their way pure? Your word I've hidden in my heart that I will not transgress against you. Your word I've hidden in my heart. Memorization. It's a great tool. It's a great resource. Later, probably next week, I'm going to make a video about memorization, how to do that. I don't want to cover all that in this one, but that'll be a separate video that's a little bit more training based because I think it is a lost art. The Christ obviously utilized it to grow spiritually. So let's simply do the same. Appreciate you. Love you. Be blessed.